All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most, frankly, audacious military operations of the entire 20th century. We are talking about the true story of how Israel pulled off a seemingly impossible covert strike to dismantle Saddam Hussein's nuclear ambitions. This wasn't just a standard military maneuver. It was a high-stakes, geopolitical heist that absolutely altered the landscape of the Middle East.
Now, 1,600 kilometers. That number represents a total logistical nightmare. That's the massive distance Israeli fighter jets had to fly, just one way, mind you, across 3 completely hostile airspaces without being detected. And keep in mind, this was 1981. There was no modern stealth technology. They had to rely entirely on strategy, pure deception, and just raw flying skill.
Section 1. The Nuclear Ambition, a Shifting Geopolitical Chessboard.
So to understand exactly how we got to this do-or-die mission, we've got to step back for a second and look at the 1970s. Following the 73 oil crisis, Western nations were just desperate for energy. Driven by this, an oil-dependent France agreed to a really controversial exchange with Iraq. Saddam Hussein offered cheap, continuous oil, and in return, well, France agreed to supply Iraq with a 70-megawatt nuclear reactor and 72 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. By June of 1980, that uranium actually arrived safely in Baghdad, taking this from a theoretical deal to a very physical reality. Officially, the paperwork claimed this was strictly for peaceful energy use and civil research, but the perceived threat? Well, the uranium supplied was 93% highly enriched. That is literally weapons-grade material. And when you pair that with Saddam Hussein's very public rhetoric about wiping Israel off the map, Israel's leadership was absolutely convinced this was a disguised nuclear weapons program built to threaten their very existence. Section 2. The ticking clock. The July 1981 deadline. Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, determined that the reactor, which was dubbed Osirak, would go fully operational or hot by July 1981. This created a hard, terrifyingly unforgiving deadline. If Israel waited until after the reactor went hot, bombing it would cause massive radioactive fallout right over Baghdad. That could potentially kill millions of innocent civilians and turn Israel into an absolute global pariah overnight. So they had to strike before July, or basically not at all.
To prepare for what felt like an impossible heist, Israel pulled together intelligence from an incredibly diverse global web of sources. You had the Mossad on the ground, the CIA secretly providing intel inputs, China quietly handing over high-resolution satellite imagery, and, surprisingly enough, even Iran, who had actually tried to bomb the reactor previously, sharing vital data. This crazy web of intelligence basically turned this heavily fortified Iraqi compound into an open book.
Section 3. Planning the impossible. Overcoming the logistics of a 3,200-kilometer round trip. Okay. So the military planners were facing an absolute logistical nightmare, a 3,200-kilometer round trip. The brand new F-16 fighter jets they just got from the US, they simply didn't have the internal fuel capacity for that kind of distance. Plus, they had to cross over both Jordan and Saudi Arabia. If they tried to send large, slow tanker aircraft to refuel the jets midair, they would be instantly caught on enemy radar and shot down. To solve this, they had to get really creative. Step 1. Heavily modify 8 F-16A strike jets with external fuel tanks just to push their range to the absolute limit. Step 2. Send 6 F-15A Eagles alongside them, purely as an escort team to handle any Iraqi interceptors. And Step 3, which was definitely the most dangerous part, the pilots had to fly at an extreme low altitude of just 100 to 150 feet above the desert floor for hours to exploit the blind spots in the enemy radar. They literally practiced this over and over by dive-bombing a dummy reactor built out in the Negev desert. But, practice is one thing, reality is a whole different ballgame. All that preparation still left them with one massive question on launch day. How do you actually get 14 heavily armed fighter jets across 3 enemy countries without anyone noticing? Section 4, Operation Opera, June 7, 1981. The execution. They launched on a Sunday afternoon, specifically to minimize civilian casualties, assuming the foreign scientists working there would be off for the weekend. But the mission was almost entirely blown before it really even began. As the jets flew over the Gulf of Aqaba, King Hussein of Jordan just happened to be vacationing on his yacht. Being an experienced pilot himself, he looked up, recognized the Israeli markings and the formation, and instantly realized they were heading for Iraq. He rushed to send a warning. But Israel had cleverly jammed the regional communication channels, so his warning never actually reached Baghdad. To slip through the rest of the airspace, these pilots executed an absolute masterclass in deception. We're talking flying tight zigzag routes just 100 feet off the sand. When Jordanian air traffic control spotted them and got suspicious, the pilots actually spoke up on the radio, claiming in English that they were a commercial flight experiencing a navigational error. And later, when Saudi radar pinged them, they switched tactics entirely. They spoke fluent Arabic and impersonated a Jordanian military patrol. They literally talked their way past the enemy air traffic controllers. After 1,600 kilometers of completely nerve-wracking, low-altitude flying and intense radio deception, the strike package finally reached the Osirak facility near Baghdad. And after all that, it was over in a flash. The actual bombing run, dropping their payloads and pulling up, took a mere 80 seconds. The precision of those 80 seconds was just astounding. Out of 16 heavy bombs dropped by the F-16s, 14 were direct hits. The massive concrete dome of Saddam's nuclear dream was instantly reduced to smoking rubble. Tragically, 10 Iraqi soldiers and 1 French engineer were killed in the blast. But miraculously for the attackers, 0 Israeli aircraft were damaged, and all 14 jets made it home safely. Section 5. The Historical Aftermath. From Condemnation to Vindication. According to the source material, Israel faced intense, widespread international condemnation for executing a preemptive strike on another sovereign nation. And this backlash didn't just come from their enemies, it came from their closest allies. Even the United States, under President Ronald Reagan, severely criticized the operation and actually halted the delivery of any further F-16 fighter jets to Israel for a while. But watch how the historical perspective on this event shifts so dramatically over time. Just a decade later, in 1991, the Gulf War began when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and a U.S.-led coalition was forced to attack Iraq. Suddenly, the world realized what an absolute nightmare a nuclear-armed Saddam Hussein would have been during that conflict. The perspective shifted so much that U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney actually sent a satellite photo of the destroyed reactor to the Israeli commander who planned the strike, explicitly thanking him for destroying Iraq's nuclear program. On a human level, it's deeply fascinating to look at the legacy of the pilots involved. The youngest pilot on this strike team was a man named Ilan Ramon. He survived the immense danger of Operation Opera and later went on to become Israel's very first astronaut, before tragically losing his life in the 2003 Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. His story will always be inextricably linked to the legacy of this mission. In the immediate wake of the strike back in 1981, Prime Minister Menachem Begin justified the massive geopolitical risk with a simple statement, claiming they had finished Iraq's nuclear program before it was even born. He viewed the strike not as an act of aggression, but as a necessary, completely unavoidable measure to ensure the very survival of his nation against an enemy that had sworn to destroy it. Which leaves us with this final, really profound question to consider. The sources we've explored show how this single event established a highly controversial precedent. How do nations navigate existential threats in an increasingly complex world? When diplomacy fails and the clock is ticking, how do preemptive military strikes like Operation Opera reshape the rules of modern geopolitics? It's a question that started in the skies over Baghdad in 1981, and honestly, it's one the world is still trying to answer today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.